Japan's biggest movie star gets a career retrospective in James Stokoe's 2012 IDW comic series. Starting with his introduction in 1954, this book covers some of Godzilla's biggest moments through the eyes of some new characters, as the radioactive lizard rampages through the ages. So put on your AMF jacket and charge up your maser weapons for Godzilla's Half-Century War on It's a Kind of Garbage Comic Edition.
It's a kind of
So this week, Adam, we're going to talk about a book that I recommended that I think I introduced you to, which is the IDW comic book trade of James Stokoe's Godzilla The Half-Century War. What did you think?
I really enjoyed it. There were some things that, as a Godzilla, like a minor Godzilla fan, I'm nowhere near what you are. I really enjoy Godzilla. I love watching the movies, and I've read a few of the comic books. Obviously, this comic probably has the best art of any Godzilla book you can find, and nobody will disagree with you if you tell them that. The art is great. The story is great. I only have one complaint, and it's when I read something like where it's a monster book. I know that the idea is that we're following around the human characters. There's just so much interaction with them, and I'm like, fuck off! I don't want to see you guys. I want to see Godzilla. And there were just a few moments where there's like small bickering or just like back talk between the human characters, where I'm like, there doesn't need to be a word balloon there of them saying anything. Like there literally doesn't need to be that. It can just be them running away. I don't need to hear like two Spider-Men making quips to each other back and forth.
Yeah, fair enough. I understand that. So I used to have kind of a similar thing where I would watch the Godzilla movies and I'd be like, get these people off the screen. I want to see Godzilla kicking over cardboard buildings and stepping on model tanks. But I think if you read, like I've read a couple of the other Godzilla comics, and I think one of the issues is if you read the comics that are too like monster focused, there's not a strong enough story, and it doesn't really delve into any of they don't have much of a character to them. Like Godzilla is supposed to be like this metaphor for nuclear war. So I find some of the movies or some of the comic books kind of lose sight of that. And they try to give him a personality or some sort of character traits or even a character arc. And I find it kind of like misses the point. I think Godzilla works best as a force of nature, where it's almost like a natural disaster movie when Godzilla comes. Like instead of focusing on the monster and trying to say that the monster actually has some sort of motivation that it's trying to get back at a character or it's trying to like get revenge on the humans, just have it so that when he shows up, it's just like an earthquake happening or a tornado touching down. Like it's just disaster when he shows up, and then he leaves, and then you're kind of left with the characters that are the main characters to either the movies or the comics. You're left with them in his wake, just like how they're going to deal with what happened. So I think this book for me kind of hits a very good blend of, there's lots of like Godzilla action in the book series, but it also introduces characters where the story is going to focus on the characters living in a world with Godzilla as opposed to focusing on Godzilla in the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was very happy to see that there was no like love story in this, that there were no branching plot lines that either I didn't notice or I just read over. But yeah, like I like that you're following the one character going through time. I guess it was different characters.
Well, it focuses on two or three. It focuses on two main characters, but there's also some other characters that are introduced throughout the series. The main gimmick to this book is that it's 5 issues long, and each issue kind of focuses on a different decade, roughly, or a different era of the Godzilla movies and franchise. So it's interesting to see the first book is the story of, so the main character is Oda, just as like a soldier in the Japanese Defense Force, which is like the post Second World War Japanese army. So he's enlisted in Japan's army post World War II, where now their biggest thing is that this monster has come up and is kind of laying waste to Tokyo. And it ties in with the original movie with Godzilla attacking Tokyo towards the end of the movie. So this story is kind of a nice companion piece to the original movie, just kind of giving one of the faceless soldiers in the movie a bit of a background. And then we're going to follow that character and his partner, Kentaro. We're going to focus that character and Kentaro, who's like his sidekick, kind of throughout the rest of their lives, where every few years Godzilla kind of comes back out from the ocean and like wages war against, kind of rampages and causes destruction. But it's also going to introduce a lot of characters from like the Godzilla franchise that Godzilla would go on to like kind of his I don't know, what would you call it, like his rogues gallery or his villains.
It's gonna call yeah, his co-monsters.
Yeah, it's kind of hard because Godzilla doesn't really have much of there's no human traits to him and no real personality. So it's
Well, he
kind of,
becomes a dad at one point, right?
yeah, we do skip over that.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah, but it's kind of, that's what I always thought was interesting was these monsters are so much bigger than the people. They're not given much of a personality. Like they're literally treated as if, Godzilla's a walking hurricane and then some of his villains are like an earthquake, a lightning storm. And it's like making these two awful things smash into each other. And then the humans are just on the ground, kind of left to either take shelter or just try to like salvage as much as they can, which I got a kick out of. And this book does that very well, where it kind of shows over the course of the 5 issues, like it covers half a century roughly, like it covers roughly 50 years. It just shows like how desperate humanity gets over the years, which I really liked. Like by the middle of the movie, the Japanese or the anti-monster force, the anti-Godzilla squad that's supposed to hunt down these monsters. By the second or third issue, they're at like their full strength. But then towards the end of the book, you see that like their job is literally less hunting and fighting Godzilla because there's no more resources to fund it. And it's just, how do we get ahead of Godzilla and warn people that he's rampaging, that he's just like on a warpath, and just try to, tell people to get out of his way and take shelter.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the book, it is a love letter to Godzilla. If you've seen all the movies and have all of the monsters in there, this is like the comic book version of Final Wars almost. Not of the movie, just like of how it's an amalgamation of just everything that you absolutely love about Godzilla.
Yeah, like this was, I liked Godzilla movies. I had seen the original and then I had a huge break and I kind of got into them years after they had come out, but the high C era ones, so the ones from the mid 80s to the mid 90s, those were the movies that I really loved. This book, like for me, Godzilla is one of those franchises where it's very hard to get into because of how the movies are sequels to other movies, but then other movies will ignore certain eras and jump ahead. And it's kind of a difficult franchise to follow at sometimes, especially, and that's not even including the fact that like some of the movies just absolutely like nosedive in quality. Like some of the movies are amazing with their effects and their storytelling, and then other, like there's a Godzilla versus King Kong movie, which is just such obviously a cash grab. So much to the point where that's the next Godzilla movie to come out, isn't it? Next year there's supposed to be that's the next Godzilla movie is Godzilla versus King Kong, which is pretty wild.
And King Kong is just Superman, where they just keep on retconning him, making him bigger and more powerful. Where you're like, I don't fucking care about King Kong.
Yeah, like, and that's the whole thing. Like, it kind of sucks that the people making these movies are just like, hey, Godzilla's a big monster, King Kong's a big monster, let's smash them together. Where Godzilla's supposed to be like a metaphor for like large scale disaster and like nuclear war and the dangers of it, and basically like after it passes it's nothing but destruction and everything else. And then King Kong is just like a giant, well, I mean, you could read so much into King Kong about like it's now especially how it could be taken as like a cautionary tale of like how humans will like especially like white people will capture something and enslave it or try to like, you know what I mean? Like it's a completely different metaphor.
I know that when I saw the first King Kong at the end of it, where he's on the building with the woman, all I thought
Mhm.
was like, this was a movie about rape.
I guess yeah, you could. I mean, if you want to look at it that way, you could. I always saw King Kong as like a victim. Like even though he's the monster, he's not really the monster. The humans are the monster, and like the treatment, like the humans find out that this like this natural wonder exists, and they're not even there for it. They're there for like some other reason. And then the default human thing to do is just like, okay, we're completely changed. Like we're not here to make a movie anymore. Our new thing is how do we kidnap this giant wonder and exploit it for as much money as we can? And how do we take it from its home and enslave it and then tour it around as if it's a triumph of man over animal? And King Kong is like the victim in his own movie. Like he's the one who's taken, like he doesn't want to be in the city, he's taken to the city. He
Mhm.
doesn't want to rampage, he's literally like forced to rampage as he escapes, and then wants just he just wants to go back. And like they do have like the love interest character, which King Kong kind of also falls in love with or like is smitten by. But it's the exact opposite as Godzilla, where Godzilla shows up, has no relationship to man. Man does not want him here. At no point in the Godzilla movie do they say like, how do we capture this thing to show the world like how strong the Japanese people are? Like, how do we enslave this monster? Like, as soon as Godzilla shows up, it's just like it's the exact same as if like hurricanes keep hitting the island. Like, how do we stop this? How do we try to save ourselves?
It's them running around going, oh
Yeah,
shit,
exactly.
we don't know what to do.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, in the US, they're like weapons, guns, rockets, planes, kill it.
Yeah, which again, that kind of, even though they have their own charm to it, like the original Godzilla, especially it was made, in the decade following the atomic weapon attack in Japan in the Second World War. It's definitely like a glimpse into how Japanese people at that time viewed like it shows, it doesn't focus on, it doesn't humanize Godzilla, it just shows it as a giant monster that all it does is leave death and destruction in its path, which I think is interesting because when you see the American version, they don't focus on that. They try to humanize it and try to give it a reason, where in the Japanese version, there is no reason for its attack. Like it's basically it's an earthquake. Like there's no reasoning with it. It just happens and it destroys.
One of my favorite things from this book, at the back there's 10 full page like splash pages. Five of them are James Stokoe. And then there's a couple other artists doing some other pages. The one that I focused on, of course, was Brandon Graham because he had a page in the
Yeah,
back. And his like I love his art style. I just felt that his page, he really phoned it in when he was drawing it, where half of the page just almost half of it is white. Then Godzilla's in the background, and you just have like the characters drawn there. I just thought he could have done so much more because every other full page splash is so inviting and so detailed. And then you get to Brandon Graham's, and you're just like, I guess.
that's kind of a Godzilla thing I find though, is that some artists, when they do Godzilla, they don't focus on it as a monster. They focus on it kind of as a natural disaster. Like, how do you draw an earthquake or how do you draw a hurricane? You don't. You basically just draw the disaster that it causes. So there's a lot of interesting variant covers for these books, or yeah, like art that was included in the back of the book, where instead of focusing on the monster, it's pictures where like Godzilla's almost drawn as a mushroom cloud. Like he's just drawn as this huge black figure in the background, and then it's just fires and anarchy and buildings destroyed in the foreground. And that's kind of like the outline of that makes out the shape of Godzilla. And then you'll have other artists, like, and even artists that I really like there was a different IDW Godzilla series. I can't remember the name of it now, but some of the covers were drawn by Jeff Darrow, who I love. And I think even he
Mhm.
said like they're not great covers. Like they're like he kind of made up his own Godzilla because Godzilla's look has changed so much throughout the ages that his is kind of like a mix of a bunch of Godzillas, and it almost looks like a big dragon instead of looking like Godzilla, which is supposed to just look like this terrible monster. And I think even Darrow said that, like, yeah, they're not some of my better things. Like, there's definitely better Godzilla work that's been done. I've seen some interesting Godzilla commissions and fan work done by an artist named Daniel Warren Johnson, where he definitely does a really interesting take on it, where when you draw him or it, you draw it from like a very low humanized perspective. So you're always looking up at the monsters and it's always in the foreground. It's like like the trail of destruction that it's left. So when you're drawing it, everything looks it's almost the way you would draw a person standing in front of an explosion, or a person standing in front of a like a thunder strike, or a tornado or something. Like just the way that it's the perspective just shows like how small the people are and how big the destruction is, which it's easy to do that for like a single image. I guess it would be hard to draw an entire comic about the character of Godzilla instead of what it represents as that, because it wouldn't really give Godzilla any character traits or personality, which you kind of have to do if you're going to do a 5-issue comic about him. But they're definitely interesting art pieces. But as far as the Brandon Graham goes one, I think it's just him putting his own spin on the character, which I got a kick out of it.
So I would recommend this book to everyone, especially if they love Godzilla. It's amazing artwork. Hopefully, people don't find the human chatter as, I want to say dry as I do, but just as, there. As a comic book reader, I love story. I love action more.
Yeah, this book, it got released in single issues through IDW, but there's a hardcover and a paperback. I think the hardcover is an oversized hardcover, which really shows off the art really well. If you're interested in it, I would definitely recommend getting the hardcover. If you have any passing interest in Godzilla or like Japanese monster stuff, it's definitely an interesting take on it. If you're a fan of any of the Godzilla movies, I definitely would recommend reading this. So I'm going to place this is going to be my new number 3. So right below Hard Boiled and right above X Women.
So this one didn't resonate as much with me. I still like it, but this one is going to be right above Ravage 2099, and Cody, hold on to your seat, right below the albino spider of Djet.
You're insane.
All right. So once again, no listener mail, new Patreons. I want to thank you for listening, Cody.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
As always, you can find us online through our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram, both at A Kind of Garbage. You can also email us at akindofgarbage@gmail.com with any questions or comments you may have. Be sure to check us out at akindofgarbage.com, where you can find links to our Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube pages, as well as our Patreon page at patreon.com/akindofgarbage, where you can get access to our private Discord channel and Patreon exclusive podcasts. Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time.
I will give it this, like the difference between Albino Spider, like the comic was interesting. I'll give it that. The movie is not a very good translation.
Representation.
Yeah, there's interesting things. Like as I wouldn't say Albino Spider is great by any means, but there's interesting things to get out of it. Whereas the movie isn't great by any means, but there's not much interesting going on.
No, I wish that they did more with that book, but you get what you get.
Yeah, I'm very surprised. So we have an excuse to talk about Veronica again.
Yeah, I was going to go on a Veronica tangent as well, but go ahead.
I'm very interested. I'm very, I guess, intrigued by the fact that for how cheap it is to do comics, either through Kickstarter or whatever now. Like if you have a bit of a fan base, like there's so many, what's that called where it's like fan funded, crowd funded? There's so many ways. I'm surprised that they didn't try to bring back Veronica as like a crowd funded comic book.
Now, with that said, over Labor Day weekend, myself and a couple of buddies of mine went up to Gotham Central Comics in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and I purchased a new Veronica
Oh
comic
my
because they're still
god.
being
Oh,
made.
they're still being made.
It was a new
Oh,
release,
I didn't
yeah.
see. I didn't even know that. I thought that they had basically shut it down. That's awesome.
No, Glenn is he's still pumping out his smut, and I'm buying every single thing I can find.
Yeah, you know what? Like, as it's not something I'm super interested in, but I'm definitely glad that it exists. Like, I think I'm not going to read every issue of it, but if you buy them and you're like, hey, there's, something really interesting in this, like, you should read, like, if someone's going to recommend something to me out of Verotica, like, I'm more than excited to read it. I think as its platform of being like an anthology horror erotica series, I think it's interesting. So if someone recommends a Verotica issue to me, I definitely read it.
I want to recommend you a game that I played today.
Oh no.
It's an early access game. It's on Steam, so I don't know if your PC will.
Yeah, it might run it.
Okay, yeah, it's called Succubus Prologue,
Oh no.
and you play as the succubus. And I'm sitting there playing it, like it's fun. It is what it is. But there's a point where there's a health, like a first aid like station for yourself, and you're in hell. And the way that the first aid station is it's a woman tied, like hanging from, not a cross, but like hanging from something.
Mhm.
She's pregnant, and what you do is you jam your arm up her vagina and rip out the fetus, crack its neck open, and suck the juices out, and then your health goes up.
Uh, who made this game?
I don't know. I think it was the same people that made the game Agony.
Oh, you've told me about some of these games before. Yeah.
Yeah, they're fucked up. And I'm sitting there playing and be like, this is a lot. Like it's fine. Like I'm playing it. I'm like, I'm not turned off by it or offended. Like
I'm
I'm sitting there
not.
laughing, being
Hang on
like,
a sec.
holy
I'm not
shit.
turned off. Wow. That's a bold statement.
But it's not like I'm gonna like be like, oh, this is too much. I better turn this off. I'm just like, oh, it is what it
Well,
is.
that's kind of what I mean. Like, that's the difference for the. I love how we're gonna at the end of Half Century War, it's just gonna be we talk about Half Century War for 20 minutes and then Veronica for 20 minutes. Like I said, like there's some interesting stuff to get out of it, but I find it's more like I find that like because obviously there's like people out there making like horror erotica stuff or they're making horror stuff and as soon as you go to make something with, horror elements or whatever, and it gets rated like adults only or 18 plus or whatever, you're like, well, we've gone this far, like why not include nudity as well? I get that, even though like it's kind of lazy and trashy, but I get it. I think it's interesting with the Verotica series, seeing how the creators will come up with ways to do it versus the ways that other people will do it. Like obviously there's an artistic way to do how horror and sex and or violence and sex like meet. There's like a creative and artistic way to discuss that and to show it to the viewer. And then there's also like the complete opposite, which is just like, how do we shock and disgust without really saying anything or exploring like a theme? So like when you tell me about like all these like disgusting games that got put on Steam and then removed, I'm just like, I think they're hilarious because it's just someone being like, these are my interests. I like horror movies and I like erotica, which is fine.
And sexual assault.
Yeah, but then like that's what I mean. Like it like instead of it instead of them having like any meeting where like it's consensual or it shows like parallels between the two or anything like that, it's just I like these two things, so I'm just going to smash them together, which is basically sexual assault. And it's like, yeah, that's a pretty much the laziest way to do it. Like that's not reading into any of it, but I just love how there's people out there that are just like that bad at it. And they're like, here's my video game. It's basically just trash because I don't know how to read into my themes. What you said, the game's called Succubus. Like
Yep.
instead of making a game about a succubus where like the whole point is to try to like seduce or ensnare men or do whatever, like instead of the game being about that, the game's obviously just like a monster game where you just do like the grossest stuff and it's like a complete misread of the theme.